Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host as always, Steve Hall, and I'm very happy to be with Bret Contreras today. He's taken the time out of his day really late at night and he's really busy with his new gym, so I really appreciate it. And I know you guys will as well. I think most of you would have heard of Bret, but if you haven't, I will briefly introduce Bret. So if you haven't heard about kind of glute training and Bret in the same kind of sentence, then I'd be very surprised. He is known as kind of the foremost expert on glute training specifically, but that isn't all he knows. He has a PhD in sports science. He's the co-founder for the Strength and Conditioning Research Review, which is fantastic. I think a lot of you guys will probably have seen at least some infographics over on Instagram from those guys, so they're fantastic. He's an author, a writer with fantastic books out there. He invented the hip thruster, so that just goes to show how much he loves the glutes and has invested so much into those, and has helped thousands of people across the globe at seminars, with the books and with articles. And Bret truly has a fantastic resource with his website and all the information he puts out. So I first met Bret in Bath with Alan Aragon, James Krieger, and Brad Schoenfeld when they came over and did some fantastic presentations. And I mean, I knew Bret before that, but ever since then I knew I had to get him on the podcast, and eventually we're here, and I can't be more than happy to have Bret on today. So how you doing, Bret? You all good?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me on.
Awesome. And today we wanted to talk about, we might bring in the glutes, but we're not going to go too deep on just glute training. We're going to talk about some more interesting topics that I think Bret has some fantastic knowledge on. And the first thing I wanted to delve into with Bret was kind of the number one driver of hypertrophy. This is what we believe to be so, which is mechanical tension. And I really wanted to hear Bret's thoughts on the way to achieve that, talking about load versus mind muscle connection, which is becoming more and more realized for bodybuilders to be quite important, and just get your thoughts on that, because I think a lot of people think mechanical tension, that's just load on the bar, lift heavy, that's all you need to do, but there seems to be more to it than that.
So what a great question to start off as. And as a biomechanist, people, to be more specific, people can confuse ground reaction force for muscle force. And in general, like if you think about doing a deadlift, okay, if you perform a deadlift and you actually round over, there's the lumbar flexion relaxation phenomenon where the erectors go silent. They go myoelectrically silent. Now, they are still producing muscle force by being stretched passively, but the active tension goes away if you round over. So you can't just, in the sense of going heavier and heavier and heavier while using poor form, for some muscles and in some situations, you can actually dramatically decrease the amount of tension put on the muscles. Well, at least the amount of active tension. And if you think about, tension being the primary driver of hypertrophy, there's two ways you put tension on muscle: by stretching it or activating it. And dynamic movements do a combination of both. But obviously, that activating a muscle is more beneficial for hypertrophy than stretching it. Now, dynamic movements have been shown to be superior to isometric movements. So range of motion is important. So stretching the muscle while activating it is more beneficial than just activating it isometrically. However, if you look at just people who stretch a lot versus people who lift weights, obviously the people who lift weights develop bigger muscles. So what we should be thinking of is muscle force, not just load or like ground reaction force or, force exerted onto the barbell. And so a good rule of thumb, if you take someone who's never, who has no experience with progressive overload and who doesn't really know how to go up and really push themselves. And I get people like this all the time as clients. They've been dilly-dallying around in the gym they've never worked with a strength coach. They don't really know what they're doing. And then you get them and you get them, they can't even do a chin-up yet. And, you get them to do, in 6 months, you get them to do 10 chin-ups. You get them to kick butt at bench press and squats and deadlifts and hip thrusts and rows and military press. And all of a sudden they're just way more muscular everywhere. And you never talked about mind-muscle connection. You never talked about quality and feel and all these things. So just getting stronger develops bigger muscles. But let me tell you a situation in my case. I was driving my hip thrust up, to 815 pounds at one point. I probably could do around like 750 right now, but at one point I could do 815, and it looked good. I put it on Instagram. It looked great, but my hamstring was cramping. I remember locking it out, and I was like, oh my God, I better put the bar down. I'm going to cramp up in the hamstrings. I didn't feel it as much in my glutes, and sometimes the hip thrust is a good example because, it is not a power lift. It's cool to put on Instagram and, get some street cred. But if you're just trying to build muscle, I remember I hadn't done hip thrusts in a while, like a few weeks. And I stubbornly want to stick to the same loads. And so I think I put on like 550 pounds and wanted to do like 4 sets of 5. And I did it, but I should have gone down because I haven't done them in a few weeks. And I didn't feel my glutes much, during the 4 sets. And if you were to have had a camera on me and looked at my joint angles, I guarantee you would have seen more spinal hyperextension, more anterior pelvic tilt, and less pure hip extension. I used other muscles to get that bar up and create the appearance of a full range lift. But really with a hip thrust, you want to keep the ribs down. You want to keep the chin tucked, the eye gaze forward, and that way you keep the ribs down and it's just the hips pushing the bar up. It's not the spine coming up with it, opening up. And so if I would have instead dropped the weight to, 495 or whatever that comes in kgs, like 220 kgs, and done 4 sets of 5, I would have felt it more in my glutes and probably produced more muscle force in the glutes. And that would have been a better driver of hypertrophy. I would have gotten a better muscle building stimulus than using the greater load. And so progressive overload is great, but also feeling the muscles doing the job and using good form is great too. So then you take someone who's only been focused, like a power lifter, who's only been focused on using more weight, and he's gotten very strong. Then you take him and you say, for the next 3 months, we're going to do more isolation lifts. You're going to do higher reps. You're going to focus on the feel, squeeze the muscle, feel the burn, use a mind-muscle connection. That guy's muscles grow from that. So it's both. I always say in my seminars, there's 2 roads that both have to be undertaken to maximize hypertrophy, and it's the progressive overload route and the mind-muscle connection route. And it's confusing because you see some guys who just all they care about is progressive overload, and they have amazing physiques, and those are the people who we point to go, look at Dmitry Klokov, look at his physique. He looks like a Greek god, and he just focuses on performance. And then you also see plenty of guys who focus on performance and don't have bodies like that. And then you go to the gym and you see guys who only focus on the feel, and they're using like 10 kgs for curl, and they're just going real slow and squeezing, and they look like Greek gods as well. And you're like, how do they look that good? And they're weak as piss. And then there's guys who lift like that who don't have good physiques. So the obvious approach is to do both and utilize both techniques. But what I will say is Brad Schoenfeld and I just got a study accepted. It's the first research that's been accepted showing that an internal attentional focus is more beneficial for hypertrophy, at least in the biceps, than an external attentional focus. And that's actually been an argument over the last several years. And this was due to, like, Gabriel Wolf is a researcher who researches attentional focus on performance measures. And she's shown, without a doubt, and now there's probably like 100 studies showing anytime you want to jump farther or throw a dart more accurate or golf better or whatever, do anything that requires like force production or distance or accuracy, things like that, you always want to focus your attention externally onto the environment. And whereas in the past, we've seen that focusing internally, it leads to increased EMG activity. So you have more electrical activation to the muscle. But does that mean more hypertrophy? Now we can say, yes, it does in some situations. Now, our study did show more growth for the biceps, but not the quads, which was weird. So it maybe there's more to that. Maybe we needed more subjects. Maybe we needed more time. Maybe it applies to some muscles, not others. But the obvious approach is to learn both. And you always want to have a good tool, like skill set and a good toolbox. And there's so many times where you're beat up and you're like you're training around some issue, your shoulder's iffy, then that's a good time to not go heavy and use a mind-muscle connection and go a little bit lighter, go for the feel. And so it's always the strength and conditioning at large loves the black or white fallacy. Yeah. It's black or white when there's so many shades of gray.
No, I absolutely love that, and I love that answer, and it makes it. People do love the black and white answer. They want it's either the pump and the mind muscle connection or it's load on the bar. Which one is it, Bret? And it's like, well, try and do both. And I know I've been, and I think lots of the listeners have probably been in the trap of doing too much of one or the other, where they just keep using light weights and just go for the pump and the feel, and they don't really get anywhere. And then vice versa. I know I've chased loads before, and if I can for sure, and like you said, the hip thruster, just like that on a squat, if I try and hit a load that I'm just trying to hit this load for the sake of it, the next day my knees don't feel right, I'm feeling it in all the wrong places and not the right places. My quads don't feel it, my knees and all of those areas are feeling it, and that's because I know my form wasn't there. So I think this is where that kind of form and execution to be the baseline of all of our training is just always so important. I think that's a great case for it, and I love that you're actually researching these elements. Cool. Yeah. So I think if you were to give any practical take homes on that, apart from the fact that we should be attacking both, do you think, I know Eric has kind of said that, Eric Helms has said he kind of thinks maybe use the kind of external focus on form, technique and moving the weights for more compound lifts where you can't really focus too much on the squeeze, like on a squat it's a bit more difficult, and then maybe on more isolation movements like that bicep curl, maybe like a leg extension or knee extension, you're focusing more on the mind muscle connection. Is that something you think could be where the research will go and show?
Yeah, so I think a good scientist should be able to argue both sides, and if I were to argue against Eric's thesis there that you should use the external, I could point out lots of bodybuilders that said, I used to read muscle magazines my whole life, and up until we didn't have the internet. When I'm 41 years old, we didn't have the internet till I was 21 or something. But I read muscle mags, and so many bodybuilders said, I always thought bench press was a crappy movement for the pecs until I learned to start benching with the pecs and, taking a wider grip, lowering it higher onto the chest with my elbows out more and really learning to feel it in my pecs. So in that case, they benefited from doing the opposite. But I actually agree with Eric's point because you're going to do multiple exercises. So let's say, and I always used to get annoyed at bodybuilders or just even people nowadays that are like, I don't like bench press. I feel it all in my anterior delts or all in my triceps. And I'm like, well, then it's a good tricep movement for you. Why can't you do it? Think of it as like something that builds your triceps. Or I feel, something all in my, I feel deadlifts mostly in my low back. Well, then it's a good erector. As long as you're using good form and not rounding, then it's a good erector exercise for you. Squats all in my quads. What's wrong with feeling your quads? A lot of my followers just want glutes, but I'm like, you're stretching your glutes under load. It's going to be beneficial for them too. And I have to convince a lot of ladies, you're not really quad dominant. You're just too heavy for your liking. If you were weaker at quads, you wouldn't like the way you look. You need to get down in weight for your liking, for your goals. The way you want to look, what you're describing, is someone who weighs, 20 pounds, 10 kgs lighter than you currently weigh. Get down to that weight and be strong at squats, and you'll like the way you look. But But anyway, I do agree with that, because let's say you use an external attentional focus with squats, deadlifts, bench press, military press, things like that, then, and you get very strong, you're going to be working a lot of muscles. And using an external attentional focus, you might use better form a lot of times, or like more like form that is safer over the long run than trying to target, like in the case of bench press. Benching like a power lifter is probably safer than benching like a bodybuilder for most people.
Mm-hmm.
Most people say when they learn to arch their chest and tuck their arms a little bit, their shoulders felt a lot better instead of benching like a bodybuilder. But you're going to do that to build all the muscles, and then you're going to perform single joint movements to target all those, and then you can use an internal attentional focus. So to complement the bench press, you'd obviously want to perform flies and crossover and pec deck movements for the pecs, and then, elbow extension movements for the triceps, and delt raises for the delts and things like that. So it all equals out. So I would agree with Eric, but I do think you should always be able to argue both sides.
No, yeah, I love that viewpoint that you should be able to argue both sides, because I think that makes the argument, you can then make, even if you agree with one side, if you can argue the other side somewhat, you kind of get a good understanding for that argument at least, and you can find any holes in why you agree with the other side. I remember you used to have a podcast, and I think one of the first episodes you did was kind of talking about biases and the importance of understanding your bias. I think that was with Jonathan Fass. There's some great episodes on there I can remember back in the day. So, no, I love that. And it goes to show that you're a great scientist. So that's fantastic.
With Alan Aragon and I, we presented at Philex in Sydney last year, and we gave a 2-day pre-conference. And both days it was really fun. We called it Knowing Both Sides. So we took a polarizing topic and we argued. He took one side, I took the other, and then 10 minutes in, we flip-flopped, and we then switched and argued the other sides.
Wow.
And then people vote for who they thought was the overall winner. And it was so much fun. But here's what was, now that idea came from Mel Siff, he was the author of Super Training. He was a legend in our field and died way too early at a heart attack, I think. But he was only like 50 years old or something, but he was just a genius and such a good thinker for our field. I wish he were still alive today. I feel like I would have become good friends with him. He proposed that, and so we did that, and it was really cool because, if you know a topic well, like people write articles bashing hip thrust sometimes, and I read them. I'm like, I could bash hip thrust way worse than they could. I know every strength and weakness of I know the ins and outs. And I do think you should be able to, if you know a topic so well, you could argue the pros and cons of it better than anyone. Mm-hmm. That's what we should really strive to do, is know the argument so well. And that, you could beat someone regardless of which position you took, beat them in a debate.
Yeah, so what is it? Keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer, that sort of concept. I like that. Cool. So the next question I wanted to get onto was periodization for hypertrophy, and whether or not you think it's important and how you might apply it for your clients. Because there's kind of research that's come out recently that kind of shows it's maybe not that important for hypertrophy. There's people arguing both sides, and I just would love to hear your perspective on that.
Another excellent question. I knew you'd some gems. So this is something I think about all the time. And Chris Beardsley, he has been doing some excellent work lately on writing some of his blog posts on periodization and what exactly is periodization. And yes, for strength, I do think for strength and for athletes, yes, there's more of a logical basis for periodization. I would say definitely you have to periodize. Now for hypertrophy, for physique clients, I think whether we try or not, if you just know what you're doing, you always end up periodizing to some degree. But I don't think it has to be as like this system. Like I don't think, first of all, like the linear approach, to decrease in rep rate. I don't agree with that at all. And also like these building blocks, like you go from this block to this block to this block, and this lays the foundation for this and this. But think about when you first get a personal training client as a personal trainer. So yeah, I want this person to build muscle, and I'm like, okay, they need to learn the movement patterns. I need to have them getting the squat pattern down pat. I need them to be able to do push-ups. I want them doing inverted rows. I want them to be able to do chin-ups. I want them practicing the overhead press motion, hip thrusts, the hip hinge pattern. So at first it's patterning and learning what are the best variations and where do they belong on these movement pattern continuums. Can I load them up with a barbell right away? Do I need to give this person goblet squats, or can I have them do back squats right away? And you're first practicing the patterns, because that's the foundation which future gains rely upon. And then you add load, you add reps, you add complexity, and you progress. And then pretty soon, 6 months later, they're very strong. And their physiques got way better. And you were focusing on more on strength and movement patterns. But once you have more advanced lifters, do you need to like write out a yearly plan? Do you need to write out even a monthly plan? Can you go to the gym and just kind of wing it? Now, okay, there is research definitely showing that periodization is trumps like non-periodized plans, where it's completely, but like where you don't know what you're doing and you just wing it. But when you know what you're doing, there's research on flexible training, flexible types of periodization, where you give them some choices based on how they feel, and those typically, from what I've seen, end up with superior results. And so when you know what you're doing, like myself, I don't write out everything because so much of it is just based on how I feel that day. So many days I'm like, I have to ad lib it because or may throw an audible because I'm like, oh, I wanted to do this today, but I don't feel that good. But then when I do feel good, it's like, I'm going to strike while the iron's hot. But every week, I'm going to squat heavy one day. I'm going to feel good to squat heavy one day. I'm going to feel good to deadlift heavy one day. I'm going to bench a couple times a week super hard. I'm going to bench 3 times a week because I can get away with that. Some people can't. But 2 of the days I'm going to go really hard, you know. I'm going to try and get a good military press session in there. I'm going to try and, you know, I have things I want to do. I don't feel good when I don't do lunges the whole week, or when I don't do hip thrusts, or when I don't do my delt raises. But a couple days a week I'm going to do delt raises, but I save those for days where I don't feel that good. It's like you can always just do delts.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to beat PRs on those ever anymore. I'm not trying to go up on my lateral raises or cable laterals or things like that. So you could say, someone could look at my program and go, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. He's just winging it. But really, I know exactly what I'm doing. It took me a lot of years to figure this out. And really, this is carefully planned. It's very systematic. But I had to work a long way to get here. I had to learn a ton along the way and learn how to listen to my body, which took me 20 years. And I always tell everyone, don't take 20 years like I did to learn my body, to listen to your body. I mean, every time I injured myself, my body was screaming at me and I would just refuse to pay attention. And that injuries are the worst because you're sidelined and you're going, God, I would do anything to be able to squat and deadlift right now, and I can't. It's so frustrating. I have to just do leg extensions and leg curls and feel like I'm atrophying away. But like, yeah, do you need to periodize, you know, like via one of these popular periodization techniques? No, you don't. But you do need to have some sort of system that makes sense and that allows for progression over time. And progression can be lots of ways. We talked about in muscle force. You've got to be doing more over time. So this could be with a volume, like load, like external measurement, or some internal measurement, focusing on quality, focusing on, you know, advanced techniques that you throw in to switch things up. The other thing I like about advanced techniques, because it's funny, Eric Helms and I disagree a lot, but I have so much respect for him because he makes me think more than almost any other person in the field. But I remember talking to him about the advanced techniques and he doesn't like them. And I like them. because so many times, I'll be, I'm like this, I'm going to throw in some drop sets this month, or I'm going to do eccentric accentuated reps this month. And, I know this is going to like, it's never like this is what I like about high frequency training. For me, I can do a heavy bench press session and then do an eccentric session, accentuated session, and then maybe a close grip session or something, or military press, and I'm pressing 3 days a week, but I still am going to hit my heavy bench session. But anyway, it's always in my mind, like, this is going to be the thing that takes me to the next level. And yeah, it rarely is the real thing, but in my mind, I think staying excited about your training is critical. And we don't take that into consideration enough. We don't take into consideration, because we've got a problem with yo-yo dieting, with people get lean, then they get fat. And we've got a problem with people quitting training. So what things can we do to make them keep training for 30 years? And for me, those things, I've done all the research on them. Even the research on going to failure is not impressive. We don't really need to go to failure. So why would you need to go past failure and do forced reps or drop sets or negatives? But there is actually good research on drop sets. But anyway, it keeps things interesting, but you use it to supplement, not to replace, except in times of maybe if you're feeling you have a tweaked shoulder or something, or pec, and then you just do the eccentric phase if possible. In that situation, you would replace it to stay strong while you let it heal. But yeah, I could ramble on and on, but I don't think you need, the periodization doesn't need to be one of these typical, block or linear or all the, it doesn't even have to be, it doesn't have to be what you typically read about. It can be very unique. I know for a lot of my clients, I switch the focus every month. And put the other things on the back burner. Like this month, I want you guys to focus on your squat. You'll still deadlift 1 day a week, but everything's on the back burner. But it's like you're going to squat 3 times a week and then do assistance lifts that build the squat. And then, but it's easy to maintain the other lifts. And then the next month, I might focus on the deadlift or the bench press. And then the next month, maybe I focus on the hip thrust. And it seems to work well for building well-rounded full body strength. If you're a powerlifter, you need to always be focusing on the big 3, unless you have a long off season. But it's because strength is a skill. But I always say for physique, I love the big 3. I love squats, bench, and deadlifts. But for physique, you should also love chin ups and military press and hip thrusts and lunges and whatever. You should have more exercise that you love equally as the big 3. But yeah, I switch the focus. I have like week 1 kind of being a deload where they hit it, train, but don't go for any PRs. You're like learning the right loads to use and getting a good feel for it. Then week 2, 3, and 4, go progressively harder and harder and harder till week 4, you're going for a PR or something you've never done before. And then you're ready for another deload and you have a new system, a new program. And that tends to work well because it works in these 4-week waves, which makes you look forward. Okay, I'm kind of burnt out of this 4 weeks. I'm looking forward to the next 4 weeks. But theoretically, you could have a year-long plan that never changed and see good results from it. So it's like, I could argue both sides to this one too. And why would you stop a program if you're seeing amazing results from it after 4 weeks? But that's just one way that I tend to do things, and it works pretty well. But there's so many roads that can lead to Rome here in strength and conditioning.
I love that, and it brought up so many different questions in my mind and thoughts, and I love the idea of kind of, I guess once you've got to a stage where you do know your body, you kind of have that shopping list of exercises and things you want to get done, and then get them done when you feel good and ready, and that's kind of that auto-regulation aspect. And I also I think the biggest takeaway that I got from that was you can have a system that you enjoy and can adhere to that overall makes sense and progresses over time. I think that's the most important thing to take away from what you said there. And you did touch on deloads, which I actually wanted to bring up, which is really cool. And I'd love you to talk specifically to females on deloads as well. But also I think some people try and get away with not deloading. Maybe you talked about having an accumulation for like 3 weeks and then deloading, which for some people they'd be like, deloading after that amount of time? Like no one needs to deload after that amount of time. But I guess others would argue, and I've seen it, where I've tried to put off deloading and then I'm just training through fatigue and then I just get myself beat up and I don't see the results I want. I'd love you to kind of talk to deloading, why you've chosen that sort of 3 or 4 to 1 paradigm.
So I'm so happy you asked this question because it's such a passionate topic for me, and one that I wish I had more access to like a laboratory and I could conduct my own research, because I have some theories, but a lot of these theories we have in strength and conditioning, you got to be open-minded. Like a lot of the research on, we say, oh, my CNS is trashed, and there's not much research to support that. And I'm like, well, maybe they're not looking at the right things, but it's like, well, voluntary activation should be lower. It's really it's muscle damage that's causing the fatigue, but I still think you can get something that we don't quite know right now, but you gotta appreciate the evidence. So think about this. Okay, let's say I train 2 days a week, full body, and I'm the type of guy who doesn't really push myself too hard. If you're a personal trainer, you've got some clients that you're like, oh, he's done after this rep, and then they somehow squeeze out 3 more, and it's like painful to watch. They're like working so hard on every set. And they have people that are like, you stop and they're like, man, they could have done 2 more reps, So what if you're the type that works out 2 days a week and doesn't push yourself, like your inherent level of, effort is not so crazy, and you never deload. You train 52 weeks out of the year that way. You'd be fine. You would never need to deload. You never get so much muscle damage and beat your body up to where you're changing your neurotransmitters and you can't get psyched up and things like that. You'd be fine. But most of the people listening to this podcast are like you and me. We're kind of crazy. We're obsessed a little bit with working out, and especially some of my bikini competitors who want to train, 3 times a day and stuff. For people like this, you need to deload. And now, what if you did what I said earlier, where you just listen to your body and you fluctuate? You have like a, whatever you want to call it, like a biofeedback, autoregulatory approach, where you just pay close attention to your body. Because I train 52 weeks out of the year, and I don't traditionally deload. But here's what I don't like about the deload. What is a deload? Like, we have what the powerlifters tell us to like take a whole week and don't lift anything heavy. Just use like 50% of your weight and go through the motions. But it's like, why do we have to do that? I never liked taking a whole week off. Why can't you deload for 3 days? Why can't you use 70% of your, how do you teach people how to deload? Do you give them the exact loads and reps and RPE and everything, or do you, because when you train clients in real life, you can tell them like that. But I also think there's nothing wrong with letting them push, some exercises. They're not going to, like, if they're doing rear delt raises, you don't have to be like, use half of the weight. Those aren't beating you up too bad, and so you can still get a decent. So when I deload, it's like sometimes I'll be like, oh God, I'm beat down. The next 3 days I'm not going to push it real hard. I'm not going to go for any PRs. I'm not going to do any squats or deadlifts. If I do any pressing, I'm not going for a PR. I'll do a little more, higher reps, but I'm going to stop it short of failure. But you can still get a decent workout. It's like we don't really have these definitions of what exactly entails a deload and things like that. So, but you can also have where you plan, you crush it for 3, 4, or 5 straight weeks, and then you take an intentional where you plan that out, where the goal is to have functional overreaching, where you're purposely pushing yourself to this overreach state. But you know that you're going to take a few days off, and hell, I used to do that every week. Like, I'd train by Friday, I'd be crushed, and then I'd take Saturday and Sunday off. Monday, I'd bounce back, because I'd always used to, for so much of my lifting career, I like to train Monday through Friday. But you can also, if I knew I was going on a vacation or something, I'd train super hard and kick up the volume, and then I'd be beat down, but I knew I'm going to take 5 days off and come back even stronger. But there's so many ways to do things. Do I think everyone needs to deload? I don't, but it's kind of like, yeah, some people can get away with round back deadlifting their whole lives. I'm not going to advise that. I'm not going to advise people not to deload. I'm going to tell them you should absolutely deload. And if you think about things on a long-term basis, you know, if you train for the next 20 years, do you really have to go, what's 20 times 52? Like, how many weeks is that? Like, you really have to go hard every one of those weeks? Can you have, you know, 10 weeks out of the year where you don't crush it? And the research shows that you can do that. You don't have to kill it every week. What's the benefit of having deload weeks where you really do go super light? You can have all those little nagging things heal up, you know, and those can become problematic, and those are barriers to long-term success. When you have something that could have cleared up in a couple of days and you turned it into some tendinopathy because you were too stubbornly trying to train through it. So yeah, could argue I keep saying this, I could argue both sides. In general, most people should plan out deloads unless they have a really intuitive way of training where they listen to their bodies and know. But yeah, you have to have experience to get to that. If it's your first year lifting, you're not going to have that intuition.
Mm-hmm. And I think I just a quote that was coming to my mind was, you'll either deload or your body will deload for you. Eventually something's going to have to give. So I don't think even people who are training hard could train hard for that period of time without an injury coming up or something coming up where they'd have to deload.
You get sick or you get injured. Yep, yeah. That's exactly true. And my friend Ben Bruno, I talked about that. Like, we used to just deload when our bodies made us. You either got it or you get sick because you're training so hard you trash your immune system.
And in terms of actually functional overreaching, that's quite a debated topic as well. Do you side with thinking that could be beneficial, or are you on the side where you think, throw caution to the wind, it's not showing that that's something for kind of muscle hypertrophy that you would need to do or even want to do?
I think there is a sound basis for it, but I also think it's you're playing with fire a little bit, you know, because overreaching, it can be functional or non-functional. You can, and so such a good question. I haven't formulated my thoughts on this, but as I'm answering you, I actually think I'm going to switch my answer and say I'm arguing against it, and here's why. So many times I'm like, you're like, okay, I'm going on this trip, I'm going to really push it, I'm going to crush it, and then you say deadlifts, I'm going to really crush deadlifts, and then you have a little bit of tweaked lower back, or just you feel so run down, and then that interferes with your training the next week. Now you could say, well, yeah, you were planning on taking the whole week off, but I never take the whole week off. But a lot of times I'll then be like, okay, I feel a little bit run down, I'm going to go light, I'll just do single leg RDLs, or I'll do like weighted 45-degree hypers or some light good mornings or something. And then you irritate it further because you're an idiot, your intuition was wrong. And now you're left with a more nagging problem, and it's now nagging, and it's like this threw you off. And if you just wouldn't have overreached, you wouldn't have found yourself in this situation. So a lot of seeing good results is just never letting yourself get sting, because pain inhibits muscle activation. You're not going to grow optimally if you're in pain. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it is just, and here's the thing too, so many injuries, people think, oh, you need corrective exercise, you had bad form. No, a lot of it's just you were too aggressive in your training. So many of our injuries are just, you know, your body couldn't hold up from the amount of workload you put it through. And it's like have everyone bench press 5 sets a day for 7 days a week, and they will develop issues from it. Have everyone deadlift or squat five sets a day, hard sets a day, 7 days a week, you will develop issues from it. You know, and what's that sweet spot to where you're doing the right amount without overdoing it, but still promoting long-term growth? That's the hardest, that's the trick that we have to learn, and it's ever changing, because I always think about this. I have a hard time keeping a plant alive, and there's like water and sunlight. There's like 2 variables. And with humans, there's sleep, there's stress, there's nutrition, there's all these things. And then there's things you can't even predict. Like with women, there's your menstrual cycle thrown in there. So there's so many variables. And that's what makes this fun, though. That's why we have a job, because we'll always have a job until there's some pill that replaces exercise and nutrition. But it's a complicated, very complicated physiology. Human physiology is so complicated, and so is biomechanics. And so it's what makes it so fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's something that I've played with my clients, kind of trying to, and taking this very much from Mike Israetel's work with kind of the volume landmarks in terms of like minimum effective volumes towards maximal recoverable volumes, and just slowly like talking to the client each week, checking in how they're performing, looking at their feedback in terms of how they're feeling, how performance is going in the gym, how their sleep's going and things, and then accumulating over the weeks. And then seeing they're getting to that kind of near the sun, as if Icarus was getting near the sun, and then backing off, deloading. Kind of, for some people, most are edge on the side of caution, so they're not getting to that point. But I don't know if, in my head, it makes more sense for more advanced clients to need to push that bound to see that result. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Brad Schoenfeld is kind of on the same lines in terms of he thinks the functional overreaching can have some benefit for hypertrophy as well.
Well, it's funny because you bring this up and I'm going, yeah, I know the way that Eric Helms programs. I know the way that Mike Israetel programs. And for them, that makes a lot of sense. I just told you, I like to switch the focus up. They don't program like that. So mine kind of takes care of itself.
Yeah.
It's just, that's what's so fascinating about it. And that's why I feel like a good practitioner in our field, you expose yourself to a lot of different trainers and coaches' systems, and you learn about them. And then that Bruce Lee quote, you absorb what's useful and reject what's useless. And you're going to learn so much from really learning about other people's systems and how they design programs and how they go about everything from their program design to their nutrition to their how they coach the lifts and you name it.
No, that's why I love the podcast. That's kind of what I think that's where it grew from. It was kind of like, how can I talk to all these experts and kind of take their gold and then spread that myself? So no, that's exactly what I try and do. So
it's brilliant. You get to pick the brains of all the high level people in the field, and then you benefit from your own knowledge, but then you're also putting out great content from it.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, a concept I'd like to throw at you, Bret, is because we've talked about periodization for hypertrophy, and I don't know how much you've looked into, and I don't know a lot about this, kind of the mTOR and the AMP kinase. And over time, when you're training for hypertrophy, volume is obviously, you're trying to progress that over time, and to a point at which you just mechanistically would have high levels of the AMP kinase, mTOR would be down-regulated. Do you think there's a case for taking periods of backing away from the volume so that you can keep progressing? Do you think there's a time where you just won't see any more beneficial results, even if you're a good like body fat percentage and everything else is working well?
God, such a great question. So I have not studied the signaling pathways with regards to volume. I think Brad Schoenfeld would be the best person to ask for this, but yes, you will have to. I mean, in my opinion, from based on what I know now, I do think not only from the standpoint of letting all the little, you develop so many. You don't just tear down muscles; you tear down everything. Everything takes a beating. You know, your whole body takes a beating from lifting, and so all the little fascia and tendons and connective tissue. And so there's benefits from backing down, just from letting you heal all over, but also kind of resetting the stimulus and getting to where you can now see results from it makes sense to me to have this. You can't just keep going up on volume 52 weeks out of the year. Well, here's what's funny about that. I'm going to contradict myself now and say this is why I've never liked the whole volume thing, because I know what people mean by it. I just don't like what is volume. Is it volume load? Is it sets times reps times load? Is it sets times reps? Is it hard sets times reps times some sort of multiplier of percentage of 1 rep max? Is it hard sets that you push past some sort of RPE or RIR, reps in reserve or rate of perceived exertion? I don't know how other people define it, but I do know that if it was like volume load, I could tell you that I could decrease volume load for 52 straight weeks and have a client grow. Mm-hmm. What you do is you just start them off in the like far end of the like 20% or 1 rep max and have them do, say you can deadlift, 200 kgs. Well, get them at 40 kgs and have them do, whatever, like 20 sets of 5 with that. And then, they're going to do a lot of volume load, but nothing was hard. And then you keep decreasing, but then increasing, or whatever. I haven't thought up the math, but I know I could mathematically come up with a situation where their volume load decreased every week for 52 straight weeks, and yet their strength went through the roof and their muscle mass went through the roof. And that's just being a naysayer right now, because that's not what they mean. But I think being a good scientist, you have to purposely pick holes in the debate or the argument to help you further understand it. But I do know for strength and hypertrophy, it's like I was talking to this guy who can deadlift 4 times his body weight. He's in Australia, and he was like, I've reached a point where I have to perform around 28 reps a week above at least 85% of 1RM to see results. And I'm going, man, I don't do nearly that many deadlift reps. I kind of rely on other lifts to build my deadlift, and I'll do like 1 hard set, like 1 or 2 hard sets a week, because I can't recover. If I did 5 sets of 5 at like 85% of 1 rep max, I'd be crushed. I just can't handle a lot of volume with it. But anyway, he's just explaining, and he's a high-level advanced lifter who's been doing this a lot of years, and he's learned what he has to do to keep seeing results. And maybe that number goes up. Now, in 2 more years, maybe he has to do 30 reps or 32 reps or whatever. But it's good that he's figured out what works for him. Yeah. But for bodybuilders, most of it, now you can say, well, they're all on steroids, it doesn't matter, but they don't track their volume load. They switch things up a ton, and they continue to grow. And what's funny is, and you can just say, and this would be a good argument to say, yeah, they're also on 10 different chemicals that throw everything out of the water. But I remember reading like Jay Cutler, an article, it was I don't know if it was Muscular Development or another magazine, but he basically said, early in my career, I could squat 800 pounds for a few reps. This is what I could military press. This is what I could bench press. This is what I did for stiff legs. And he listed out all his strength, and he's like, here's what I do now. And he looks better now. He's more muscular now. But you watch bodybuilders train, and they're really strict form typically, and they squeeze, and they're trying to do the opposite of what powerlifters do. They're trying to make the muscles do all the work and minimize momentum. Well, not all of them, because you can see one's using a ton of momentum, but they're trying to prolong their joint health and their tendon health and stuff. They're trying to train a way that they can keep on lifting year after year and not injure themselves. If they train like powerlifters, they'd be snap city, So, but what about natural bodybuilders? Do they all track their volume loads? And, do they? I don't know the answer to that. I'd like to see how they all train and see, can you get good results not tracking volume load but I know for myself, every time my pecs look their best, it's when I'm benching a lot and like when I'm at my strongest.
Yep.
But then again, I rely on the bench. I don't do a ton of I don't do much isolation work for pecs. But like same with delts, when I'm kicking butt at military press, my delts tend to look really good. I'm also doing a lot of isolation, and my delts have grown this year from doing more isolation lifts. But I'm not going to track my volume load for delt raises and stuff. I like to think of what Eric says, like track my PRs. I don't track volume load, but I track my PRs. It's like right now I know I can military press 185 pounds for 10. 205 for 5, 225 for 2, and 235 for 1. Those are my current best lifts for military press, and I want to beat some of those. And if I can take all those and add 5 pounds to all those, my delts should look better. But then I do the fun stuff afterwards, and I'm doing lateral raises twice a week, but it's always, sometimes I do them seated, going a little bit lighter. Sometimes I go a bit heavier with more momentum and heave them. Sometimes I do them with cables down low. Sometimes I put the cable column up a little higher, and I just try to focus on the stretch, and I don't even come up all the way. I just kind of come out to here. Sometimes I do band lateral raises where I come up a little bit higher than parallel, and I don't come all the way down. I just keep the tension. Then I do lateral raises so many different ways. I'm not really thinking about beating things. It's more of trying to really, sometimes I do eccentric accentuated lateral raises, which I love. They suck. When the first time I did that, I went, wow, I went like my whole lifting career never really lowering the weight under control during lateral raises. I just let gravity do its thing. So, I think that's kind of summarizes my thoughts on that.
No, that's really interesting. It actually brings me to what might be the last question, because I don't want to keep you for too long, and that's to do with experimenting. And I know, and you've spoken about it throughout the podcast, and I've heard you speak to it on other podcasts previously and in your blog about how you always experiment on yourself. And I'd love to know you've been PTing, I think you said 22 years, you've been lifting for over 27 years, and I'd love to know the biggest takeaways. And also specifically, you did the no barbell experiment on the squat, deadlift and hip thrust. And I'd like to know kind of your thoughts on it. And then also like machines versus free weights, because that argument gets put out there. You see bodybuilders doing all the barbell lifts really heavy, then you see other guys, all machines, and whether or not, and it might be the conclusion I'm thinking will come, whether it's just picking your poison almost.
So, okay, I've got so many thoughts on this topic, so I want to make sure I don't forget anything. So, first of all, with the topic of machines versus free weights, this bothers me because people always think of like leg extensions, like squats are better than leg extensions for quads. But I obviously think you'll get the best results doing both of them. So it's the black or white fallacy when you should just do both. That's obvious. But what if you could just do squats? All right, here's what's funny. There's this stability continuum. So on the one hand, we have unstable surface training, which people kind of know, like that's not going to maximize your muscle growth. But then we have the most stable form of training would be a machine, squat in a machine. And then barbell free weights are in the middle there. So then people will say unstable is stupid. Well, the most stable is a machine. Then they say, well, that's too stable. You need stabilizers. And so free weights are free weights just the perfect amount of stability to maximize your hypertrophy? Or are there some pros to using machines? Now, but some machines are better than others. I really like plate loaded machines. Like if you use the lever squat machine at your gym, or even the other thing is the Smith machine. I need to do a study on this because I want to show people when I did my no barbell experiment, I gained strength in the squat. And I could see all these powerlifters because I know I used to train a powerlifting gym and I could just hear them being like, what an idiot. I'm telling you right now, you can make Smith machine squats feel strikingly similar to barbell squats. You just have to, when you unrack a barbell, you're leaning a little bit. You look at your feet in relation to the barbell, but then people will do Smith machine squats and put their feet way out in front. Now you're like making it more like a hack squat or something, But you can actually stand, unrack the bar, and put your feet back and stand in a similar position to where you drop down and the bar just moves vertically. It doesn't push forward or backwards. You're not even using the guide supports that much for like forward anteroposterior stability. So you can make it feel very similar to a barbell. But I like the Smith machine. I love it. So I'm not a Smith machine hater. Bench press is definitely different off a Smith machine because you don't have the arced path. But yeah, like think of a lever squat or like deadlifting off the hammer strength. Okay, you do have more stability, so that's going to lead to more confidence with a lot of people, especially if you have bad leverages. If think of that. If you've ever, I always like the people that are like, you have to squat perfectly upright. Anyone who says that is completely incriminating themselves, that they have such limited experience that they don't have a clue what they're doing. If you say you should squat upright, you have not trained. I've trained 100 people. I've trained probably 2,000 people as an actual personal trainer, but I've probably trained 100 people who had such poor squat leverages that they have to lean forward significantly. Think of Lane Norton, my client Carrie. She's all legs and this tiny torso. You can elevate her heels and she still has to lean forward a ton, you know? She can wear squat shoes. She could do front squats, goblet squats, and still have to lean forward a lot. It's like, that's just her physique. Think of these NBA basketball players and things like that they're just lankier and they long femurs, long, shorter torsos. And so that person might see better growth off of a machine. But we like to be the black or white. We like to have an answer, and it depends. It depends. Maybe, you know, there's a lot of reasons why someone might see better results. And let me tell you this. At my gym in San Diego, the Glute Lab, we have 5 different hip thrust machines. So we have my hip thruster. We also have the Smith machine that we hip thrust off of. We've got the glute builder, we've got the booty builder, and we've got the scorcher. They're all different. They're all unique. Now, if you took, we have 150 clients right now and 30 Glute Lab members, Glute Squad members. So we have about 180 people that go in there week in and week out, and 6 ways to hip thrust. It'd probably be 30 people like the booty builder the most, 30 people like the glute builder the most, 30 people like my hip thruster the most, 30 people like the Smith machine the most, and 30 people like the scorcher the most, and 30 people will hate each piece. Like, there's people who love the scorcher and then 30 who hate it. There's 30 people who hate the Smith machine. I love Smith machine hip thrusts. They're my favorite way right now. But there's going to be tons of people who don't like it. And so that's why, you know, when I do my seminars, I always tell people, like, I'm going to quiz the audience. We're going to try all these different ways to glute bridge, and you're going to raise your hand. Some people love my frog pumps where you put your heels together. Some people don't. Some people like this. Some people like wide stance. If I do wide stance bridges, I can't even get my hips up to full hip extension. It just feels off for me, but that's, my hip anatomy is well suited for abduction and external rotation. Other people's are not. The hip anatomy plays a huge role in what how we should perform exercises, but lower body exercises. But yes, you have to experiment with yourself. You have to experiment with clients. You can't think that there's one way to do things. If you do, you're going to shortchange your clients so badly, and you can't be you have to be open-minded, and you need to have a large toolbox. Obviously, you're going to use your hammer and your screwdriver a lot more than this specialty tool. But if you train a lot of people, you are going to use this specialty tool all the time. You know, you're going to use it every day with someone. And if you didn't have it, you would shortchange that person. And so learn from bodybuilders, learn from powerlifters, learn from strongmen, learn from Olympic weightlifters, learn from CrossFitters, learn from athletes. Talk to them, ask them, you know, have them experiment, ask them, what do you feel the most? People are smart about their bodies. They feel it. It's hard, you know, you can't know their bodies as well as they do if you ask the right questions. And so that's why I'm just a huge fan of variety and not being so, and I've even done EMG experiments on people to see that, you know, I had a client, Sammy, she could get way higher glute activation from goblet squats than she could heavy back squats. I had her do a 50-pound goblet squat. She got way higher glute activation than when she did a 185-pound back squat. She could do the 50-pound goblet squat she could have done for probably 30 reps. The 185-pound back squat she could have only done for like probably 8 reps. And same with deadlifts. She could get way higher glute activation off kettlebell deadlifts than she did barbell deadlifts. And she got a way higher glute activation with a 106-pound kettlebell than she did a 275-pound deadlift. And maybe she likes, think about both those lifts. The goblet squat, it's centered, it's right there in front of you. the kettlebell deadlift is centered right there in front of you. Maybe that's something with her body. She benefits from having that. If I never did that experiment with her, I would have not known how to maximize her glute development. Now, if she's a powerlifter, you train the powerlifts. You train more specificity. But if you're a physique athlete, you got to find the right variations for you. But I will say this, every client I've ever trained performs some squat variation. Every one of them. All 2,000 I mentioned, they do some type of squat. They do some type of hip hinge. They do some type of hip thrust or bridge. I find a couple of upper body pressing movements that work well for them, a couple of upper body pulling movements, and voila, you just progress on the ones that feel best for them.
Oh, amazing. I think experimenting within the bounds of kind of what we know is so underrated, and I think a lot of people think what we know is so clear cut and precise, but it's really not. It's very open. Like you said, there's so many different models even that experts have come out with to periodize for hypertrophy, and they're all looking to maximize hypertrophy. You could look at Brad, Mike, yourself, and Eric, all trying to get the same goal, but like you said, many routes to Rome. So I love that. Is there anything you've experimented with that you've discovered isn't actually supported in the literature or could even go against what the literature might say?
God, I know if I had more time to think, I could come up with some stuff.
That's good enough. That's good to know.
There's certain things when you know research well, like, okay, there was this, I mean, I could go on and on about this stuff. And this is why researchers should have experience in the gym. A lot of them do. And I've been fortunate to meet a lot of these guys. Like, and a lot of, like, it depends on the school, but a lot of schools, like at my school, AUT, most of them had rugby backgrounds. They lifted, so they still exercise. Then some schools, it's like, probably these stereotypical nerdy, lab coats that don't know much about exercise, but they're trying to research. They're trying to come out with good research. So there was one that showed that if you did a glute bridge and then rose up onto your toes at the top, you had this spike of glute activation at the top. That's what you don't want. And yes, you're getting a spike because you're making it awkward, but that's not the best way to hip thrust. You don't rise up onto your toes. You want people pushing through their heels. It's just this weird spike because it's an awkward thing. But if you did that, you would decrease the amount of reps you do, and you would, it's not the best way. And I know that through training people. If I ran a training study and did that type of bridging versus the other, you'd see greater growth with the other. There's some research with blood flow restriction training, which I think is great, but is it needed when you're doing the type of lifting that we do, where you're doing a variety of loads and doing heavy, medium, and light load lifting and progressive lifting? Would blood flow restriction training be additive, or would it just be redundant? It is greatly beneficial for times, like certain unloading times, use it. There's great research behind it, but I'm skeptical of it being additive if you're already training the way we typically train. There's research right now coming out on German volume training. There's 2 studies that have emerged, and it shows that what I like about it shows that there's a volume limit. Mm-hmm. But that's not the way that it was. It's not. There's some flaws with the study design. They're throwing 2 exercises together in one day for 10 sets of 10, and it's like all the people I read writing about German volume training said just pick one exercise. So if it doesn't fit with the research, you've got to be like, okay, this is beneficial. You can always glean things from studies. You can always learn from them. It does show that there's a daily volume limit that if you surpass it, it's actually counterproductive. But it doesn't mimic what most people do with German volume training, so you can't discount GVT altogether. No. I remember reading a study showing that barbells were far superior to kettlebells for producing neuromuscular performance, and then you look and they're using heavy barbell loads like squats and power cleans and all these lifts, and then they're using light kettlebells and doing like goblet squats with like, I think it was like 35 pound, like 16 kg kettlebells. And that would be fine if they didn't make heavy kettlebells, but I have 203 pound kettlebell. I've got, what is that, 97 kgs?
Around that, yeah.
Yeah, I've got a 97 kg kettlebell. Why didn't they use that to do, I can do swings with that. Why didn't they use that? And, why didn't they use heavier loaded kettlebells and then compare the two? So maybe barbells are superior, maybe kettlebells are superior. That study wasn't designed to answer that question. So that study was designed to answer the question, are heavy barbells superior to light kettlebells? So yeah, this is what it's just like. Being a lifter takes a lot of years. I mentioned that earlier, to figure it out. Being a personal trainer takes a lot of years to figure it out. And being a scientist takes a lot of years to figure it out. But the good news is, if you're hitting all three, I always say you should, what you know is this like pie chart of training yourself, training others, and then reading and learning and researching from others, And you do all three of those, and you're growing every day, every week, every year. You're growing, and then once you've been doing it enough years, you finally start to get a clue.
Amazing. I think we'll call it there. It's been a fantastic chat. I've absolutely loved it. And I think we're going to have so many requests for you to come back on the show, because I think we just skimmed the surface of some really interesting topics that I think are super interesting for the audience in particular. So massive thank you, Bret, for coming on. If people want to reach out to you, find your stuff, I'll make sure this is all linked in the bio below. But where's the best place to find you, Bret?
Well, if you forget my name, I'm known as the Glute Guy. So you can just Google the Glute Guy and my website will come up. So from my website, I don't blog that much anymore. I used to blog like crazy, but I don't blog that much anymore. Now I'm most active on Instagram, but the blog has links to my Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. But like I said, I'm mostly on Instagram, and I try to post stories every day and everything and keep that active. But that's the way to find me.
Amazing. Yeah, I'll make sure that's linked below. And yeah, if you want to see some amazing glutes and Bret sweating out in his gym thrusting, then you definitely want to check out the Instagram. That was amazing. Thank you guys. And again, thank you, Bret, for coming on.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. And I'd love to come on again down the road.
Awesome.